Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You are listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Zambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and today's guest is Amy Volas. I think this is the maybe third time she's been on the podcast. Amy is a good friend in the startup and sales community. Asked her to come back on the show without really any big topics or agenda. We just thought we'd turn this into a bit of a jam session. As we were emailing back and forth, she said, the topics today are dealer's choice. So what we ended up talking about is really kind of two main topics. We spent a good chunk of time talking about the importance of communication, the importance of listening, the importance of understanding how much of what we're sharing in a sales presentation, in an interview, when we're interviewing a candidate, or when we are the candidate getting interviewed, how much of what we're sharing is actually getting remembered by the other person. Turns out it's a really, really small amount. It's only about 5%. And so we went into some really specific ideas around how we can do better as communicators and how we can do better to make sure that the person that we are talking with is understanding what we're doing and really synthesizing the information that we're sharing so that they, as a prospect, don't leave confused, as a candidate, don't feel like they understand what we do as a company. And certainly if we're getting interviewed, make sure that the company that's doing the interviewing really understands who we are as a candidate. So lots of really specific strategies in there that we jammed on for a while. Then we took a few minutes and talked about the state of hiring when it comes specifically to women in technology and the DEI initiatives that many companies have been talking about, especially over the last couple of years. And so I was asking Amy whether or not the needle is actually moving, or are things kind of at the same state as they were a couple of years ago. And so we talked a little bit about that, and the tactical advice that she had around that is really more about creating great environments as opposed to writing job posts to make it easier for non-traditional people for our roles to be able to apply. So those are the two main topics. I think you're going to enjoy the conversation. Again, it's just more of a jam session, two people swapping some ideas, and hopefully there's some stuff in there that I think you'll be able to put to work. If you haven't met Amy before, Amy is the founder and CEO of Avenue Talent Partners. Her background includes converting and selling more than $100 million in revenue, and she has been named one of Sales Hacker's most dynamic women in sales. Amy is a true sales fanatic turned entrepreneur. She was bitten by the startup bug many moons ago. You'll find out later she's 47, even though now I just told you. And what she likes to say, she can't imagine spending her time anywhere else. She created Avenue Talent Partners to help startup founders with the tremendous task of hiring their most valuable assets, which are sales leaders, enterprise salespeople, and customer success leadership. So that's a little bit of the context. Amy is also the co-founder, along with Scott Leese, of a group called Thursday Night Sales, which is a community you should absolutely check out. If you just go over to LinkedIn to Amy's profile or do a search for Thursday Night Sales, you can learn a lot more about it. Started as an online community, and now over the last couple of months, they started doing in-person events. Last October, they did an event down in Las Vegas. This April coming up, they're doing an event in Florida. Amy talked a bit about that as well. So definitely check out Thursday Night Sales, whether you can go to the live in-person event or you can join the online community. Great community, great people answering really important questions around sales, leadership, entrepreneurship, and everything in between when it comes to running and working at a startup. So that's it for now. Let's head over to my conversation with Amy Volas. Well, let's talk about the 5% then. We can look at different contexts. One is a CEO that's recruiting. You're going out there trying to hire a head of sales, a VP of sales person. It could be as a salesperson, I'm talking to a prospect. It could be somebody that's on the other side. They're interviewing for as a VP of sales or chief revenue officer. We get hours of time in interviews and product demos and those things. And it's a little scary to think, okay, if I've spent, say, 3 hours with this candidate or 3 hours with this hiring person, of those 3 hours, only 5%. I mean, that's 9 minutes
Yeah.
of 3 hours actually gets remembered. That's a little scary, a little spooky.
Well, and it's getting worse, I feel like. I think 5% might be generous because we live in this world also. Like if you're not in person, if you don't have a very captive audience, people are how many times, Scott, have you been on a Zoom call and you can hear that and it's a Slack thing and you see somebody's eyes go over there. You've lost them. They're not listening to you. You've lost their attention, let alone text messages, let alone, like we're living in this digital age with a lot of interruption. And so I think that 5% might be a little generous. And so what do you do with that? I think is the key. And for me, the way that I've thought about it is, especially in my sales background, or when I'm having really, really important meetings where I'm not just showing up to be a keynote or to present because I can't control stopping and engaging. I have to just show up as that kind of figurehead. But into a conversation, it's those moments of pausing to say, how do you feel about this? How are you thinking about this for your business? Whether it's recruiting, whether it's funding, whether it's a sales meeting, whether it's, through the hiring process, it doesn't matter. It's more along the lines of, I feel like we get so caught up in assuming because we're looking for signals. And when we see what we think is the signal, then we assume that we've got it or that they've got it, or that body language of like nodding, like, oh yeah, they're totally picking up what I'm throwing down. They're engaged. And if we don't stop in those moments, especially in the two-way conversation moments of not, this is like nails on the chalkboard for me. Does that make sense? I hate that question. And the reason why I hate that question is I feel like people are talking at me. And if it doesn't make sense, I'm smart enough to say it doesn't make sense. And I feel like it's a filler question because you're just trying to get validation for what you're saying. So instead, I'm always wanting to understand if what I'm talking about in that 5% or the 100% or the 30, I don't care what the percentage is. How are you thinking about this? Is that even a priority for you? Like, do you even care about any of this? And if you don't, that's cool. Let's change gears quickly. It's that ownership of, I get that I'm the one speaking right now, but I get that you're on this journey with me. And I need to make sure that I'm being responsible in the conversation to not talk at you, but talk with you. And that's a really big thing that I'm super dialed into is what are we doing with versus at?
I like those questions that, how do you think about that? Or how do you feel about that? Because it forces the other person to do some cognitive, machinery going on in the brain, and they have to tell you versus, does that make sense? The answer is they're always going to say yes in most cases, either because they just want to get to the end of the meeting and you've already bored them for the first 45 minutes, or it doesn't make sense and they don't want to tell you it doesn't. It takes a certain amount of courage for somebody, whether even if it's a prospect or a candidate or someone else, to say, no, actually it doesn't. Can you explain that again? There's a really good story I read. I can't remember the book. It was around the financial crisis. It was one of the books that came out just after the crash in 2008. And they talked about, I think the author is a New York Times person. It'll come to me. But he was telling a story about how they had somebody come in and explaining all these very exotic financial derivative trades. And it was a room full of PhDs. And throughout the entire presentation, nobody asked a question. Everyone said, this makes totally get it. Yep, I understand. Later on, after the crash, they went back and interviewed those people. None of the people in the room understood what the person presenting was saying. None of them wanted to be the first person to say, I don't get it, because of the peer pressure of the other PhDs in the room. They didn't want to feel like the stupid one.
They all want to be the smartest person in the room.
Yeah. They don't want to be the one to go, I don't get it. When in fact, nobody got it. But by doing that, they feel like they're being, oversharing or too vulnerable. So it's the equivalent of like, does that make sense? Yeah, it totally makes sense. The AI platform does this on the blockchain and you have these integrations. Oh yeah, I totally get it. Meanwhile, they're like, I have no freaking clue what those people do.
Or I don't even know how I want to think about it. Right. So like, I even noticed this that happens in a lot of I just did this and I corrected myself, and not many people are that present in conversations. But as you're talking about that book and that scenario, I immediately started thinking about my ex-boyfriend that had 3 different degrees, that always had to be the smartest dude in the room, that would never admit. So I'm not I'm thinking about this and I literally was like, wait, no. That's not what I'm here to think about. And so regardless of external interruptions, and that is the power of storytelling. What you just did took me to that moment of thinking about it, and I could easily snap back. But that's also a powerful thing too, of are we creating some sort of feeling of relevance and, oh, me too, or I totally get this. And I think that's where the anchor comes into play of, I look at anchors, right? I talk about anchors and buoys. In this case, I'm talking about an anchor into the conversation, not dragging you down, but that gut check of like, are they just trying to be polite? And I think saying, does that make sense? Somebody's not going to feel comfortable, to your point, for the points that you made, but also understanding how they think through it to say, that's a really interesting take. And I hadn't even considered that. What I meant was this over here, but it sounds like that's not even relevant to you. And that's active listening, right? Where it's like, well, then let's maximize that 5%. And if all of a sudden we trip that wire of saying, actually, like this isn't even at all what is even relevant. It could be a really cool conversation. It's okay to say, maybe let's put a pin in that, because my understanding when we started this conversation was this thing over here was really important. And I want to honor that request. And if you'd like, if that request has changed, we can still stick with this. And people automatically snap back and they're like, actually, I didn't even think about this. You got me this over. It actually is a bigger priority, or both of these are priorities. We're going to need more time together. Okay, awesome. But I think it's that I look at my role in important conversations that I have as a concierge. It is my job to guide. It is not my job to control. It is not my job to take over. It is not my job to talk at you. It is my job to understand what's happening and to navigate together and to help you do that well, versus these are my 5 objections that I want on this call. And I'm going to talk at you and I'm going to do my whole playbook here of how I handled this. And, oh, and wait, you looked that way. Wait, you looked away. I'm going to assume that something like you're not paying attention to me, where it's like, actually, I looked away and maybe I'm thinking about that story.
Yeah.
We assume. And that assumption thing is like a real gnarly problem.
So, yeah, there's a couple of things I'd love to add to that. So we had a woman on our podcast a couple of years ago named Lauren Janusik, and she is an expert in listening. She teaches people listening skills. One of the things that she shared is that there's different listening types. And I'd have to go back and listen to the podcast, but I think there were 6 different ways that people listen and process information. And one of the specific characteristics is that some people, when they listen, they actually do look away and it appears they're not paying attention, but they're processing. And I learned that I do that. And so when I'm on a call and I find myself looking away, I turn back to the person and say, I know I'm looking away. I'm looking away because this is the way I'm trying to process the information. I'm still paying attention. So I catch myself so they know that this is I know the way I listen. And it's important to just not make those assumptions.
Or the way you show up in a conversation, right? So like, God, here's the thing. We're talking about stuff that I care about. And anytime it's something that I care deeply about, or I've had a lot of experience in, my tonality immediately changes. And I sound like I'm mad sometimes when I'm really just fired up about it. And I'm like, wait a second, I care and I want to help and I'm here to do that. And I know this about myself. Oftentimes, I will disclaim that. Like, look, I am not mad at you. I am not accusing you. I am not angry about the situation. I actually care a lot about it. And I've been here before and I feel this deeply. And so if that seems like it's too much, check me. Like I'll get into flow state sometimes and I don't even know that it's happening. And people are like, wow, okay. It just immediately, when you're aware of perhaps what some would consider your shortcomings, when you are aware of it and you call it out, it immediately endears you to the other person. They're like, oh, wait, this person actually cares about this conversation. They're showing up to have a meaningful discussion and they're self-aware of how they listen, how they come across, the way that they do that. And they're trying to do their best to be with me in this moment. I would love more of that in the world, please.
Yeah. Yeah. And the second thing I want to build on what you said earlier, Amy, here I am looking away. People listening can't see me looking away. Was the body?
Scott.
I'm not paying attention to you. The second piece of that, I actually just came out of a call with a group of 3 founders at a startup. And they were all three in the same room on one Zoom. So I had them framed. I had one person in the middle, one on the left, one on the right. And I'd asked a question to the person on the right about, what in particular did he feel like he needed the most help with? And he started talking about marketing and something really specific with their business. And having the three people framed in the Zoom frame was interesting because as he started explaining these challenges that he had, the one of the founders on the other side, I watched him go from kind of sitting normally with his hands down. He took his arm up and put it on his chin, and then he kind of started leaning back away from the other founder. And I was just watching, and this is what you were sharing about being a guide. I was listening to the person on the right and watching the person on the left as he was leaning back. And after the person on the right finished sharing what he was sharing, I said, I want to share something with you all because I think it's important. And I feel comfortable sharing it because I want you to know what I'm observing. And it may be nothing. I want to let you know this is what I saw, and I'm curious to know if it means anything. So I said to the person on the left, like as person right was explaining this, I couldn't help but notice you did this, and I did the action for him. And he just started laughing. And I said, is there anything to that? And he said, just the idea of trying to solve that problem that he was just describing just felt so overwhelming to me because we've been struggling with that for so long. And I just don't know what to do about it. And I was like, whoa, that's awesome to hear that, as opposed to thinking, oh, person on the left doesn't like person on the right or thinks they're way wrong. They're actually agreeing. The body language is, and I even said the body language to me was as if you were looking up at a mountain. You were leaning back, trying to get the full view of the mountain. And he said, yeah, that's exactly what it feels like right now.
And what a powerful moment. Literally, I got the chills because here's the thing, Scott, about that. You met them where they were in that moment. And here's the thing about meaningful dialogue and discussion and business relationship. Every single person wants to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be understood, and they want to be valued. And so when you're giving yourself and them some grace of saying, I observe something, may I share it? And then they give you permission. They've given you permission. It's different than when you say, well, you hired me and I'm consulting and this is what I saw. And there's clearly some friction here that we've got to deal with. Look at the difference. You would have shut them down. You could have created friction where it didn't need to be. And it's funny. I think those disclaimers of when it's happening or what we're observing or what I do this a lot, may I give you feedback and it's going to be direct. And that's a very interesting moment for me because not everybody wants feedback. Not everybody cares, even if they're paying me. Not everybody cares what I have to say. And that is okay. It's then what is the context around this? Does it still need to be said? And if so, then how do you deal with that? But what's interesting about this is I'm very direct. You know this. And I pull no punches. And I know that about myself. And I'm not trying to be cute. It's not shtick. It's just sort of who I am. And the more I want to help, the more direct I get. The very first conversations I have about founders that want to work with me, it's the very first thing that I say is this is probably going to be very different than what you're used to in speaking with other executive search firm owners. And here's why. And here's what to expect. And my job isn't to tell you necessarily what you want to hear. It's to tell you what's going on and how I can help to see if we are aligned or not. And how they respond to that immediately is a revealing moment that's helpful because I'm not for everybody. Yeah. And I think that's the other thing that people need to realize when it comes to communication, even if that 5% that's being gleaned, whether it's being gleaned the right way or the wrong way, it is absolutely okay to know that you are not going to be for everybody.
It's a good thing. It means you're taking a stand and you're being who you are, for sure.
Yeah.
So if we were to put, so we started off with this 5% of what is communicated at best is what is heard. Then we talked about the dreaded, does this make sense question. And we talked about taking control or not taking control, but guiding people through. How do we turn this into a simple lesson for a startup founder, whether it's they're recruiting or they're selling to a prospect or somebody that's interviewing for a VP of sales gig at a startup? How do we turn this into something tactical that they should or could put into work?
In my mind, it's okay that you don't have all the answers, but it also starts from the top down. And if you are that founder and CEO, the decisions that you make, the things that you do, the things that you glean, the help that you get, that all matters. And it's okay if you need that. Nobody's judging you. But how you show up, like it's interesting. You and I both know, I think, Christine Rogers, and she
Yeah,
had
sure. It's great.
She's amazing. She had a LinkedIn posting today about CEOs when they ask for help and they do what you're there to do together and the magic that happens. And then those that don't. And why is that? And I think that's the actionable takeaway here is when you're showing up to a conversation, the actionable thing in my mind is ditch your assumptions and keep an open mind to try to, whether you agree or disagree, that's okay. But keep an open mind of why are you in that conversation? And by the way, if you don't care about this, if you're like, I don't want to be in this conversation, then don't go, then say no, thank you. Or delegate it. But remember, it starts at the top, and these decisions of the people that you're having these conversations with shape a lot of what happens next. And so I think one of the things that has helped me understand that's better that I would say to any CEO is you will disagree with a lot of people. And that's a moment not to shut down. It's actually a moment to open up. And so what I mean by that is how many times, Scott, from an actionable perspective here to be helpful, do you talk to somebody and they say, well, fair enough, we'll agree to disagree. I do not like that. I actually feel the same way about it when it says, does this make sense? And here's why. I can't do anything with that.
Mm-hmm.
There's nowhere to go. My recommendation as a CEO and other CEOs or founders or entrepreneurs listening to this is those are feelings that you're having that should be signals. Look at that as a signal. So the very next thing that I do is we can disagree. I'm okay with that. But I want to make sure that we are both clear on what we're disagreeing about. And in that moment is actually where the progress happens, because how you're disagreeing with me and why, oftentimes it's completely different going back to that 5%. So I'm trying to make it actionable here about giving you like a little bit of story or context around it, because it wouldn't have made sense if I was like, just seek to understand and don't agree to disagree, but like in my mind, it's that pause of saying, is everybody clear here on what's happening, even if we are not on the same page? And that is okay. But what's not okay is when we throw up our arms and nobody has any idea what's going on and you just leave the room feeling dejected or defeated or annoyed or all those icky things.
Yeah, the ambiguity is what creates the festering within people, and then the negative feelings and the negative down the line sorts of things for me. So I like the idea of taking like a meta level approach. Okay, we're going to disagree on this. What specifically are we can we agree on what we're disagreeing about? Well, I'm disagreeing on the timing of this strategy. I don't think we should do it now. You want to do it now. I disagree with the strategy itself. I don't think we should do this. We should do that instead. I don't agree with the person that we're going to have do this. I mean, there could be 20 reasons why there's the disagreement. Let's just figure out, let's know which it is, as opposed to saying it could be any of those, or we're just principally disagreeing with each other. Because then you can't work with that. You can't work through it. The more specific you get about the disagreement, the better. And
then you're assuming, and then your feelings are driving the conversation or the action that happens from there, or the assumption. And it's like, we all have, especially when you're disagreeing, feelings and emotions, they run hot. That's why I say, like, one of the best lessons I learned, and it was through a coach that I worked with, was to understand that we all have feelings. They're not wrong. They're not right. It's what we do with them that matters, and to look at them as signals. So you and I could be talking right now, and I could totally and completely disagree with you and feel icky. Like, you don't understand me. Like, I could be thinking about these things, but I don't know that. All I know is that I feel this way. So how about I give you an opportunity? And this is the second thing. Let's not assume bad intent in a conversation. Even if we've heard, or we think that we've heard, that we are not aligned, let's not assume. Let's just clarify it and give somebody the benefit of the doubt to clarify it. And then if that clarification, this happens in interviewing all the time. and this is actually very actionable at the same time. I will talk to founders and they'll say, I met with this VP of sales and they were talking about enterprise sales and they were talking about partnerships, and we don't have partnerships, and that's not our person. And I'm like, wait a second. Did you pause for a moment? Because partnerships was a big part of this. About 20%, 80% was on these other elements. Did you spend time there? No, because they don't know what we do. And it's like, you just shut down a potential opportunity to have someone that's really well-rounded. And so this is guidance and coaching that I give to my clients of when you feel that way and you're like, or what they're describing to you is murky, or they can't be specific, give them the benefit of the doubt once and say, I'm not tracking. I'm not clear. You're talking about partnerships. We're not anywhere near thinking about that. We're just trying to get this thing off the ground. Can we go back and talk about that? And then if they can't do that, they're not listening. They don't take the social cue. That's a problem. Like that's the biggest problem I find is people, they get one signal and they're the judge, jury, and executioner right there off of one signal when it's like, wait a second, there's 98 other signals. What's happening?
All right, folks, we are off and running in my conversation with Amy Volas. A lot of times when people are listening to these kinds of podcasts, they're wondering like, these are all really good tips. This is really great advice. How do I actually put this into action? How do I create some real strategy? How do I get some systems in place? How do I learn to implement some of the skills that I'm going to be learning on this podcast or on webinars or other places that you might be learning how to grow and scale your startup? Well, good news. That's exactly what we do here every day at Sales Qualia. So we have a coaching program called Startup Selling, where we work with early stage companies. Typically, the teams that we work with are seed funded or A-round funded, and our job is to help early stage founders build a sales strategy, implement the key selling systems to get repeatability and scalability, and then, of course, teach them the skills to actually go forth and make all of that happen. So if you're interested in learning more about the coaching program, I'm certainly happy to have a chat with you. If you've not come across much of what we've done before, maybe the first best step would be for you to join one of the live trainings that we've got coming up. This year, we've decided to go very full force on doing lots of open to the public, no cost live trainings. We're doing masterclasses, trainings, work sessions, and other ways of teaching startup founders exactly what are the systems they need to build, what are the things they're doing right, what are the things that they need to change as they grow and scale. So if you want to learn more about those live events, just go over to salesqualia, Qualia.com, salesqualia.com. Right there on the homepage, there's a link on the top of the navigation bar that says live events. Click on that. It'll show you all of the upcoming events we have coming up, as well as access to on-demand recordings of some of the previous ones we've run over the last couple of months. So no shortage of ways for you to learn a little bit about the startup selling systems that you need to build to grow and scale your company, and also get a better sense for how we think about sales, how we think about systems, and how we think about training people just like you with the skills they need in order to get to the place you want to go to. So head over to salesqualia.com, click on live events. You can also download a copy of my book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, join our email list, do all kinds of great stuff over on salesqualia.com. So head over there if you haven't already. And that's it for now. Let's head back to my conversation with Amy Volas. Yeah, and so for me, I was thinking about that 5%, which is like specifically one of the things we teach all the time is one meeting, one outcome. And I think oftentimes if you're out selling your product, if you're interviewing someone and your time is short as a founder, and you're like, I got to get through all of this stuff because I've only got an hour with this person. I'm going to get through everything. Or the same as an interviewee, like I got to make sure this person knows that I'm qualified. We're dumping a lot of information and trying to get through too much is where the jumble happens. And that's where people get confused and they start tuning out. And then the only thing they remember is the 5%, which might not be the 5% we want them to. So we always teach people, you're going into a meeting or a conversation, like, hey, what's the best way to get the most out of the time we have available? Or what's the one outcome of this meeting? Or, hey, I've got us down for 30 minutes. And based on the notes, when we spoke before, we said in this meeting, we wanted to do this. And just get agreement on that, because that also helps you keep the conversation focused if it starts going off to the left or the right. And say, okay, this sounds like an interesting thread. Maybe we need a separate conversation around that. In the meantime, we said that we wanted to get to this one end. by the next, we're already 12 minutes in, we got 18 minutes left. And let's maybe have a separate conversation on that. And that's, again, guiding the conversation. Some people might feel like it's controlling. I use the word control. You want to control a meeting. You're using the word guiding. I think it's the same in this context semantically, in that people want to be led. How many times? I mean, most people we're selling to, most people that we're interviewing, I hate being in meetings and realizing 5 minutes into an hour-long meeting, like, this is going nowhere. I'm tired of making up agendas. I'm tired of coming up with objectives. I'm tired of the one that's trying to figure out what the outcome is. I appreciate it when I get into a call and someone says, hey, we got 30 minutes. This is what I think the best use of the time is. Or, hey, Scott, we got 30 minutes. What's one big question you want to make sure we get answered? Whether it's somebody on my team or a client or somebody that we're interviewing. And when you do that, I think it just helps everybody stay focused. And that way, the 5% that you want them to learn is actually probably a much bigger than 5% because it's only around one topic. It's easy to remember one topic as opposed to remember 17 things that I've covered in 30 minutes.
Amen.
So,
I do not disagree with any of that. That all makes sense to me, Scott.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
I used that just now in the same conversation I was just telling you about with those 3 founders. I used that. Does that make sense? And I just remembered I used it twice. Ugh. Oh, well, learning moment.
I will say where it really became nails on the chalkboard for me, there was a piece of technology that I wanted to buy for my company, but I wanted to see a specific use case before I did anything else. And I didn't want a demo. I just wanted this one use case. I knew about the rest of the technology. I just needed to see this one thing. And this gentleman gets on the phone with me, and I'm not kidding you. I can't remember anything else that he did say. This is the 100% of what I remember. He would show me something. Does that make sense? Show me. Does that make sense? After every sentence, does that make sense? It was like, does that make sense on steroids? Like, does that make sense? Took over so much so that I was so turned off. I stopped the conversation and I didn't move forward. I found a different piece of technology.
It's a verbal tick at that point, and it's almost like if you're outside and you hear like some buzzing noise, and you can't not pay attention to it after a while, and now it just supersedes everything you're trying to do.
Yes.
The same with ums, or if I'm listening to a podcast and the person that's speaking or interviewing, there's lots of ums or some other verbal tick. I've been in situations where I'm listening and I just say to myself, I just can't pay attention to the content, even though this person might be a Nobel Prize winner. I can't pay attention to the content because the presentation is so poor.
Here's the other tip that I will leave everybody with. I couldn't agree more. And I'm sure I have my own things that I do. Not all of us do. None of us are perfect. One of the best gifts that I gave to myself, and it's never too late, is to go through Toastmasters. Because if you say like, any of that stuff, in my particular instance, there was a cowbell and there was a ticker. So every time you did it, not only would it be accounted for, but a bell would ring. And until you hear it for yourself, you do not really realize what's happening there. The same thing with any of those verbal tics. So for anybody that does struggle with that, and I think especially for highly technical first-time founders that might be a bit earlier on in their career or their journey, and they don't have to publicly speak or communicate in the verbal form very often, that's where it really happens. And when you think about what you just said, I don't care if it's a Nobel Prize winner, you're going for money in a funding round, or you're trying to sell this from a founder-led selling perspective. It's certainly a skill that I can't underscore in terms of its importance.
Cool. That makes sense. If you've got a few more minutes, since this is Joe's choice, I know we just spent 30 so minutes on this topic. There was another topic I wanted to ask you about, and I guess it's more of a state of the recruiting market or the state of the hiring market.
Sure.
And specifically, I wanted to ask about the state of hiring women in leadership roles and hiring the DEI and the DEI, segment, just to group everyone into that, which is not what I should be doing, but I think you understand the question.
Is this
which
for the
is
podcast or just you and I riffing off of this? What are we doing here?
for the podcast. I want to because and the reason I'm asking is because we have internally worked really hard to look for more diverse candidates, and we've been successful in hiring those candidates. I know other companies are doing the same and have been doing the same, especially over the last 2 years after the riots and or not the riots, the protests and everything that happened here in the States. So I'm curious now that we're almost like 2 years past when everyone said, hey, Black Lives Matter, and women in tech with the Me Too moment matters, and everyone says lots of things. How many people are in your estimation, based on your view of the world, is the needle moving at all? Or are we still in the same spot we were 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago?
I think the needle is louder than it's ever been. I don't know about the movement of it. And I
Okay.
think, not louder than it's ever been. It's loud. It was really loud a couple of years ago, to your point.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to think about what this all means, right? So people think about diversity and inclusion, or, well, we'll just leave it at that. Diversity and inclusion, what does that mean? And it's either I want to hire a woman or I want to hire a person of color. And that actually is a bit offensive in a conversation as a woman, right? So like, I'm a woman, the last time I checked, but it's more than just those two things. And this is what our problem is in tech, where it's not just women or men or gender. It's not just race. It's also people with disabilities. It's also people in the LGBTQ plus community. It's also the 55 plus community. There are so many different things that create a diverse workforce that has, yes, a lot to do with your race or your gender, but it has to do with all these other things. And nobody's talking about those other things. And I'm really trying to lead a lot of discussion in front of and behind the scenes about ageism is alive and well in tech. And there is a plethora of wisdom just being wasted because you have a first-time founder. This is just a use case. I'm not picking on anybody, but just a use case that's in their late 20s that doesn't fully realize that they too will age and thinks that there is a problem of somebody being lazy, or they don't have grit or grind or gumption or that fire in their belly left. And it's funny because I joke, I know I don't look my age, and half the time I don't act like it. I'm 47 years old, and people will think that I'm still in my 30s. It's a really good dye job. But here's the funny part. I will pause and say, would you hire me for this role? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes. But you wouldn't in practice because I'm put out to pasture because I'm a 47-year-old. Now, that's one thing. So like, let's define what it is. That's step one. And I think that we still have a lot of, I'm not seeing the needle move really in the full scope of any of that. But also, let's also be aware of the world that we're living in right now. More than 5 million women left the workforce last year. Burnout is a thing. Childcare is a thing. This whole rhetoric around either you're remote or you're not, that's also a big part of the problem, because there are women that are working moms that their childcare issues are being affected by the pandemic and they can't work the same way. And when you make black or white statements of all or nothing in the office or out of the office, some women don't thrive at home because they can't get a break, right? And because their children are like, mom, 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 mom. And then you're upset because they're not as productive and you're not understanding of a different workaround. Some people don't want to go into the office anymore. Some people do. And so I think there's that whole thing about meeting people where they are that people aren't talking about. But let's also remember the stat of the world that I live in. So I deal with leadership, executive leadership for sales and CS. And the fact of the matter is US Census data, this isn't my data, more than 75% of people in sales are men. And so the problem isn't one that I can solve easily. Sure, I help my clients hire in diversity, and I'm proud of that. But I also have to have the tough conversation to say, well, I'm committed to this and I am a woman and I care about this deeply. It can't start with me as the final solution or the full solution. It's what are we doing to bring people into sales, to keep them in sales, to enable them, to support them, and to realize that if you want somebody that is different than you have to understand them. And so that's in the way of your job descriptions. That's in the way that you project yourself through your website. That's in the way of the language that you use. So it's one thing to be like, we have a commitment to diversity, and then everything behind the scenes is broken and it's flawed. And you can't keep women because you treat them horribly. And I'm just using women as an example. You have no understanding of gay pride isn't just a month. Black history isn't just a month. And it's not just saying on your LinkedIn cover page, like, we celebrate pride and here's a rainbow flag around our logo. People are insulted by that a lot of the time. They appreciate the support if it's backed up by consistent action. They don't appreciate it when it's just a shiny object to make you look like you are enlightened. And this could be a whole separate podcast.
I know it could. What I heard you, yeah. So what I heard you say, which I hope is more than 5% of what you said, is that the initiatives unto themselves, like, hey, we want to recruit more women, we want to recruit more people of color, we want to recruit people in the gay community, is in some sense a topical solution to the problem. The real problem is, do we have environments in our businesses that support those types of people that they would want to come work for us in the first place? Whether that's more flexibility or being true to not just having a rainbow, but actually having real support and real initiatives behind gay pride or the Black community or other things. So it's not just like, oh, I got to write the job post so that women know they can apply. Let's make sure the environment is there to support and sustain. Because if we do hire the woman and she leaves, well, what was the point of all that?
Well, and by the way, you are not vilified as a founder, as a white male founder, if everybody in your company right now is another white male.
Mm-hmm.
But it's what you're doing. It's the words that you use. It's the actions that you take to back those words up that matters. And I wouldn't be offended. I'd actually go and work for a company that said to me, we have no idea what to do. We just know that this is really important. And these are some of the ways that we're thinking about it. And this is why talking to you is really exciting to us. But it's not just about ticking off the box that we have a woman on the executive leadership team. Because I'm going to say this to you, and this is a true story. I am Scott and I, different Scott in my life, Scott Lees.
Yeah.
We do something called Thursday Night Sales together. I'm actually a few years older than Scott. And we are both accomplished and we both have different backgrounds. And I'm so proud of the work that we are doing together in that community. We have had people that have approached us that treat me like Scott's administrative assistant. And he and I have talked about it, and it's not so obvious. And it hasn't even always occurred to him because those are the norms. So when, gentlemen, you are in a meeting and there is one woman or maybe two women in the meeting, or there's one woman and a person of color, don't make them your note taker, your administrative assistant, the person that's going to clean up after the meeting, the person that gets the food. Raise your hand and do it yourself. That's how you include. So it's like, again, Scott, like you might want to chop this and we can have a different discussion about it. But these are things that people think about, and it still happens to me. And did I get completely offended by it? No, but I just asked for help from Scott to say, I'm not your assistant. This is actually your relationship. I don't even know these people. And I'm starting to become quite offended. Can you take the lead? And you know what? He did. And you know what? That's amazing. And you know what? That's what allyship is called. Our collaborations always leave me energized, and I'm very grateful that we can come together to have conversation that I do believe is meant to help other people, and that it does. So I'm here for that. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, my friend. Appreciate you making time. Good to see you. Good luck with all of the cool things you're doing. And we'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Bye.
All right. Yeah. That's a wrap. Thank you for listening to the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. Really, as always, enjoy my conversations with Amy. Lots of different directions we end up going in those conversations. And if you reach this point of this particular episode, it tells me you probably enjoyed the content. You probably enjoyed the podcast. And so what I'd love for you to do, if you haven't already, go ahead and click that subscribe button in whatever podcast platform you're listening to the show. That way you can get updated on all of the shows that we've got coming up. We've got a full schedule coming out with at least one episode every single week for the next few months. So I think you're really going to enjoy the upcoming guests and topics that we're going to be covering throughout the course of the next few months. It's also, by the way, if you haven't left a review, please do leave a review for us on those podcasting platforms that you're listening to. We read those reviews, tell us how we're doing, tell us what we can do to make it better, tell the rest of the world out there what you like about it. And if there's any guests or topics that you want us to cover, let us know that as well, because we do read those reviews and that helps guide some of the guests that we bring on and some of the topics that we cover. And then finally, the third thing, so number 1, subscribe. Number 2, leave a review. Number 3, tell a friend or 10 about this show. Viral is still the best way to get the word out about podcasts, even if you're the Joe Rogan show. That's still the best way for people to learn about podcasts. And so here at our podcast, even though we're not the Joe Rogan show, we do want to get out to this word out and this message out to as many people as possible. And we'd love your help in doing that. So send somebody a text, maybe send them a link to this particular episode, let them know that you're listening to the show, that you've subscribed to it, that it's something they should check out, and help us spread the word. All right. That's it for now. This is Scott Sambucci signing off.